All right, thank you. Let me get my screen going here. Thank you everyone for being here. This is exciting. One of the silver linings, I guess, of COVID, all the virtual events, we get to do some international stuff, which is cool. So it is 8:30 o'clock on Thursday night, my time, and I'm usually in bed by 9 o'clock, so this is good. I had some tea and some coffee earlier, so I could stay up a little bit late for you all. But yeah, I'm hoping that we can make this interactive and interesting and useful for everybody. We're gonna kind of go through some of the work that I've done at University of Arizona, and then hear a little bit from all of you about kind of your context and what might be helpful for all of you. So yeah, and like was already said, lightweight and impactful UX in action and on a budget. And I'll kind of talk about the context that I'm coming from and why this really matters to me. So yeah, so just a little bit of context. This is some of my team. We're a UX team within an academic library. We have been working remotely for over 2 years now. Although this was one of the rare occasions we decided to go on site with our masks on to do some prototyping. We used to do everything in person, so that shift was pretty significant. And it did lead to a little bit of sort of innovating in our space as far as how to do research and design completely remotely. So I think we've learned a lot, probably all of us, in the last couple of years. So my title is UX Strategist. I do have a master's in library and information science, and I was sort of hired originally at the library as kind of your traditional librarian, so instruction and reference and serving people, students and the faculty at the university as a librarian. And I was put in charge of our library website back in 2010. And ever since then, I've sort of moved into this UX path. And so I did a lot of usability testing early on, a lot of content strategy work. So libraries and higher ed in general tend to have a ton of content. And so a lot of our websites become kind of these overwhelming sort of mass of content and information architecture challenges because we try to be sort of comprehensive in the information that we're sharing. So I dealt with a lot of that early on. I ended up being appointed as our first website product manager. So that meant I was in charge of kind of prioritizing work for our website and our digital presence. We actually have a family of websites, so it was also looking across different experiences that people have with the library online. And currently now as the UX strategist, I moved out of our technology team and into administration. So we almost act as if we're like a sort of a research and design agency within the library. So we have a lot of different projects kind of coming through us. This was a journey mapping exercise we did before the pandemic about internships. And we actually had interns coming in and doing some journey mapping work with us. So this is my team, or this was my team this was June 2021. So last year, you may have, I guess it's very different in New Zealand, but at least in the United States, we sort of were all locked down for a long time. And many of us were working completely remotely. And in the summer, for like maybe a month or two, we came back in person. So this was a kind of in-person retreat. And so we just have 3 full-time people, myself as the strategist, full-time UX designer, and a content strategist who just started a couple months ago. So it was really just the 2 of us before that full-time. But then we also have a lot of students and interns that come through the team. So like I said, we're an academic institution. So we have both undergrads, we have grad students coming through from various departments and disciplines. And we also have a lot of interns that like to get experience doing UX work. So many semesters we'll have an intern come in and work on specific projects for us. But there is kind of a lot of turnover almost by design because of that. So there's a lot of training and onboarding, getting people up to speed on different projects. So that's another kind of constraint challenge, but also a benefit of where I work. And I had to throw this picture in because this was just 1 week ago today. We met in person, again, very rare occurrence. This was one of our meetups. So we also have a UX at UA meetup group. It's the largest UX group in Tucson in the Southern Arizona area. And we went and met in person for the first time in 26 months, I think is what we counted as a meetup group. So that was kind of nice and special. That's me on the right. So some context around the library. So we're a large academic library. We have about 200 employees, 9 departments, and also 5 locations. So we're a large campus, and we have sort of the main library, a science library, special collections, health sciences. There's also a law library, poetry center library. So we're kind of spread out and have a few different sort of specialty areas. And some of the departments that we work really closely with in the library. So we have the UX team, there's also a marketing team. pretty small, kind of similar size to us, but they do a lot of work with us on communications, content style guides, things like that. We do have a technology team with a team of web developers that we work closely with on all our website projects. Public services, so we have the frontline staff who work directly with our users day to day. So they work at the desks, they do chat, they do email services. And so we really connect with them to learn from the front lines what's really going on with our users. And then librarians who work directly with a lot of our faculty, our researchers, our instructors across campus. And a lot of them specialize in different disciplines. And if you happen to be here from a library, I know we have at least one person in here. So Jeff Cruz used to work at the University of Arizona with me. I know he's now in Sydney, and it's amazing to see him here. But if anyone works in a library, I'd love to see that in chat so we know who are the librarians here. So the University of Arizona, we've got about 45,000 students, 1,600 employees, and 50 or so departments. So pretty big. We're a research one institution. It's one of the places that hires the most people in Tucson. So it's very central and important to our community. Some of the departments within the university that our UX team works quite closely with are IT, obviously. So our central IT services that supports all the campus websites, campus applications, and then marketing. So we have a central marketing brand management, again, for stuff like content, branding, visual style, things like that. Oops. There we go. So the work, many websites on campus. We have a family of websites, I like to say, at the libraries. We do have quite a few homegrown applications and a lot of technical debt. So because we do have a development team that tends to be pretty ambitious and likes to build stuff, but we don't often kind of build in the sustainability of those things. So we often end up with this technical debt and trying to sort of sustain things over time, which can become a challenge. We've moved a lot to doing more with third-party applications just for the sustainability factor. So we try to do some customization where we can, and I think I have a couple examples of that. There are a lot of academic libraries, and so many of us do not have the luxury of having our own design development staff. And so there's a lot of services like SpringShare is a really big one. So some examples, SpringShare alone is one of the vendors we work with, and they have LibCal, LibAnswers, LibGuides, LibHelp. Did I say that one? LibChat. And so we have a lot of those sort of products that we support and try to customize them as we can where it makes sense for our audience. And we also do a lot of services. So we do have a physical space. We provide a lot of services from, lending books, lending laptops, interlibrary loan, a lot of those types of library services, and then our spaces. So we're one of the most heavily visited spaces on campus, tons of study space, study rooms, technology. So people come and use our spaces that way. So our work is not just on the technology and sort of digital interface side, it actually looks at end-to-end experience across all those things, which is fun. And so our primary audience is students being kind of the number one. We've got 45,000 of them that we serve. Researchers, so people who are looking for information, for library resources. We do a lot of other work now with data management, GIS support, data privacy, data preservation. So those sorts of things that researchers need. Instructors, so we deal a lot with helping teach information literacy in the classroom, helping integrate library services and resources into the curriculum, things like that. Visitors, so we have people coming in to use our collections that might be from out of state, or they have very specific research needs that come in. We do exhibits, we do a lot of stuff like that. And then our employees, so especially with our website, our employees are on our website every day and they use it to serve the end user, so paying attention to them as well. Okay, so now I want to pause and it's going to be your turn. So if you have your phone handy, that might be the easiest way. If you don't have your phone handy, you can open up another window or browser, and you're going to go to a website. It's called menti.com, www.menti.com. And then there's an 8-digit code. So you'll see it on the screen, but I think it's also either in chat. It's in that document. So it's 6449-3516. And once you're in there, it's going to ask you who your audience is. So I am curious to hear, and if you're currently employed and you have a very clear audience, that's maybe an easy response. If perhaps you're between positions or you're still a student, maybe thinking about who your audience was, either at your last position or what you anticipate, who you anticipate serving in your role as a UXer. And it's multiple, or not multiple choice, it's a fill in as many options Submit more than once. How do you say that? Submit more than once. So you can submit and it'll let you submit more than once, multiple answers. So if you have multiple answers to this question, feel free to type them in and we'll see what comes up. University student, staff, and faculty. So we've also got some university people here. Cool. Ooh, and school librarians. That's cool. Let's see. I see more students. Footwear shoppers. Okay. Customers, training, school teachers, academic researchers. Great. Oh, and just the public. Okay. School leavers is interesting. People that are leaving school, or is that an expression I don't understand? B2B business. Public, and just a public, yep. Kind of interesting to see the breadth here. Quite a few public, banks. Athletes, okay. Great, I'll give about 10 more seconds for this. And if you haven't, I don't actually see the chat, but I will look at the chat later. If you haven't put it in there and you wanted to put any more details or explain your answers in there, feel free, we can get to know each other a little bit better. If someone can explain what school leavers is, I'm curious about that.
Rebecca, it's approximately high school graduates in the US. So
oh, I see, people, got it. Okay.
Yeah, who either leave that
like as they're just leaving, like, got it. Got it.
Yeah, feel free to unmute and have a chat at this point. You don't have to be muted.
If Zoomers means people that use Zoom, we were just complaining about the UX of Zoom earlier. That's funny. It could be something else though. That could be slang too.
Yeah, maybe it's Gen Z.
I was thinking, seeing Gen Z, Gen Z, we have some students on that are always helping me translate things that other students are saying all the time. I feel very old. Mums. Okay, cool. Thank you. We're going to go. We have another question for you all as you're thinking about this. Oh, if I can remember how to go to the next screen. Yep. So the next, and you sort of hinted at this already, but the next question is, where do you work or study if you are currently a student? Where do you work or study? I have some guesses based on what we saw on the last screen. And if you're on Menti, you might have to click a button that says go to next slide or next question. U of T. And there's lots of U of Ts. Is there a U of T that's local? There's University of Texas, University of Tennessee. There's a lot of U of A's too. I'm a U of A. People always confuse us with other U of A's. Alabama, Arkansas, Arizona. Okay, we have some government, some freelance, a couple of government, 3 government. That's great. We need more UX in government, I have to say. I'm trying to get my passport, it's stressing me out. Maybe it's better over there, it's hard here. It's harder than it should be. I felt like when I got my passport 10 years ago, I just walked into an office and got it the next day. And now it's like a 3-month wait for an appointment and then another 3 months before you get it. And I'm supposed to travel in a couple months. Anyway.
So someone in the chat said a university's innovation center. So I assume that's an answer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Oh, University of Toronto. I wondered because there's another U of T I wasn't even thinking of. University of Toronto has a bunch of libraries. They are a complicated library system, and University of Toronto is massive. I know the UX librarian that used to work there, and but they also had a UX lab. I hope the UX lab is going still. Okay, great. Well, for the sake of time, I'm going to keep going, but good to kind of see we have a good spread. And it's great that we have universities here because some of these examples I think will resonate. I hope they resonate with everybody, but especially if you're in a similar kind of environment to me, you might get some benefit from some of these. Okay. Oops. There we go. UX research. So I'm going to walk us through some examples of some of the things, some of the projects that we've worked on. And again, a lot of this is really lightweight. I was talking to another librarian a couple days ago, and she called it scrappy UX. And I'm not totally sure if that's the right term for it, but just to give you a sense of, it's quick, it's very iterative. There's not always a very clear process. You don't always know where it's going. This is just an example. This was one of our students in America a couple years ago. We did an hours project. So library hours, for whatever reason, are really complicated. We make them more complicated than they probably need to be, but we were doing a lot of testing around language and architecture of our hours. And so her brilliant idea was, let's just put a paper prototype together. I'm going to get a whiteboard and some sticky notes. We're going to wander around the library and get some feedback. We're going to ask some questions. So that was just a really good example of, yeah, some real lightweight, scrappy research that was very useful. So one of the things that we've been doing for a few years now, definitely more so before the pandemic than we are now, but something we call Tiny Cafe. And so one of the advantages of working at a university campus is most of our audience is right there at our doorstep. And so how do we take advantage of that in the recruitment process? And so what we do is something that's set up as a regular cadence of a pop-up cafe where we just have some drinks and some snacks, and we ask people who are passing by, do you have 5 minutes of time? Do you have 10 minutes of time? Help the library, help the campus. And this has been really successful because especially once we got into a regular schedule. So we were doing this every week. We had a structure, we had a cart of stuff. We just brought it down, set up in the library lobby, and had really good success in doing that as a regular thing. We have a Keurig maker. Usually it was getting a little warmer. So here we have some cold coffee, and we set up outside. So the few that we've done since the pandemic began have all been outside wearing our masks, and that's been working pretty well. So Tiny Cafe, and I'll show you some examples of the sorts of things we've done there. So this was a really good example. It was over summer, and we had this massive project to implement Primo, which is a discovery system for libraries. And so we were shifting, this is a third-party vendor, we were shifting from an older version to this newer version of this tool. And there was a lot of stuff that we could customize. So we wanted to make sure that we did a lot of testing to figure out what do we need to customize in our instance. I was fortunate that we had an intern who was a library science graduate student. He focused his whole summer internship on this, and we were able to do 91 usability tests. So we actually had 91 students and faculty come through Tiny Cafe, mostly Tiny Cafe. I think we had 10 that were scheduled with faculty because they're a little bit harder to intercept on campus, but the rest were students. And we were able to test 22 of the most primary tasks that people might be doing with this tool. And it was over the course of 6 weeks. And we were able to do a ton of customization based on that, from the filters on the left to what we label things in the menu, to some certain things that we can promote. There's something called recommended resources that we're able to promote within the tool, and the homepage search box. So it really informed a ton of decisions in order to make sure it was a successful launch in a short amount of time. So this was a couple years ago now, but it's still a really good example that I go back to. Something we did just last week, which was actually at the Tiny Cafe I showed the photo of, is what's called Who Gets What. So another thing within libraries that's complicated is who gets access to what thing. So we have our regular faculty and students, but we also have students from other institutions, high school students, we have alumni, we have the spouses of faculty, and there's all these different kind of complicated rules about who gets what. And this was not something that even really existed in one place on our website. So we had a few different ideas of how do we present this content in a way that's useful and easy for people to understand. So we created these 3 pretty rapid prototypes, and then we did a Tiny Cafe and we did some preference testing. So we asked them what, we had sort of a series of tasks, and then we placed the prototypes in front of them and asked them to find it. We checked the time on task, were they successful, and how confident were they that they found the right answer. And so we were able to do testing over, did I not put the number of people? It was about an hour and a half, and I think we had 8 or so people come by. That really did inform which of the top two, like there was one that was not successful that we just got rid of. And then we narrowed it down, and then we thought, let's pull some of the best pieces out of these other prototypes. Oh, here we go. 8 participants, 2 tasks each. That's what it was. So this is a Notion table. We like Notion a lot if you're not familiar with it. I've also used Airtable for this type of thing to just track that data quickly as kind of the note taker as you're doing these rapid types of tests. And this was just a really helpful way to track that information and make some sense of it afterwards. So those were 2 Tiny Cafe examples. Another thing we do a lot is what we call Talkback Boards. Again, our users are right there walking through our buildings a lot of the time. And so this is essentially a whiteboard with a prompt on it that's used to capture the customer voice. So you might have seen something like this out there in the world. It's something we started doing. We actually had another intern where this was essentially her full-time job, was putting up the Talkback board, making sure it still got the supplies that it needs, taking it down, transcribing it, going to our research planning meetings every week to figure out what's a good question to ask. In this example here, this was actually the last one, kind of sadly, before March 13th, 2020. And so the last Talkback board that we had up in the lobby was, how do you recharge over spring break? And it was kind of the sad thing. We kept it as an artifact after that because people talked about Disney World, which was then closed down a couple days later, South by Southwest, which was canceled. And it became this thing that we had around for a while. We just kind of took it down. But anyway, that was not necessarily a research question, but just a way to keep people engaged, keep the thing up there so that people learned it was there and they'd kind of look for it and add to it. But I'll show you some examples that are more research-based, more kind of UX work. So this one is also our most recent one. We just took this down a couple days ago. And interestingly enough, it was also 3 prototypes. This is for a library search box, and we're looking at the search box on our homepage, and we're trying to figure out if there's some things we can do a little bit differently. And so we basically had 3 versions. None of them were our existing search box. They were all kind of components of other search boxes that we'd seen, just to get people's reactions and kind of do a little bit of preference testing around that. And we had a very clear winner. I was actually shocked. A lot of people thought that the simpler design, which was the one on the right, would be the most popular. And some people really disliked that one. So we were sort of shocked by that and got some really good data. Not necessarily like, now we're going to go and implement this new search box, but what is it telling us? What is it that people are paying attention to? What are the options that they want to have out of a library search? Super easy to do, stick it in the lobby, got over 35 responses from people. Here's another example. So I mentioned we do stuff with physical space. And so we had some pretty significant library renovations a few years ago, and we had a big budget for furniture. And we wanted to figure out what are the items that people like the best, that are most comfortable, most conducive to focusing and studying for long periods of time. A lot of times people are in the library for 5 hours at a time. And so we were fortunate that we were able to get the actual furniture. So we got pilot furniture. And so that's not in the photo, but there's photos of the furniture, and then the actual furniture was around the board. So people could test it out, try it, and then vote on their favorites and their least favorites. So this is, I think, what is it? We've got several options up here. Yeah, 7. So 7 photos of tables, 7 actual tables, and these are laptop tables. We did the same thing for chairs, for full-size tables. We had a few versions of that. We also had some sort of more loungy furniture. And these are pretty significant decisions, and just having librarians sort of sit around a room and decide didn't seem like the best method. So we thought, how do we bring students into this process? And so then this directly impacted which furniture we decided to buy. And we also got some pretty good comments in here as well. I don't know if you can read any of those, but people told us why. Another thing that we've done that's been really helpful to remove the barrier of recruitment, which has always been tough. Tiny Cafe works well for some things, but depending who you're looking for, and if you're doing things remotely, that's less useful. So we created a participant pool. We used MailChimp to do this, and MailChimp's free, so we haven't had to pay for this, which is great. And it's essentially an opt-in mailing list for people to say, yeah, I'd be interested in helping the library. So we have it now as an email list. We've got about 350 people in there now, students, staff, and faculty. And we have them tagged, so we can also target if we're looking specifically for faculty for a certain study or for students, we're able to do that. And this screenshot just shows you some of the things we've sent out. Sometimes they're really quick 2-question surveys. We've done first click testing, we've done preference testing, we've done card sorting, we've done tree testing, many of the different unmoderated studies that you can send out there. We've also done it to recruit people and say, sign up for a Zoom session with us, and we've done that too. And so one example, this is that same project I mentioned, the who gets what sort of conundrum that we deal with. So this is just to show you the email that we sent out. So we usually have a big, we try to keep it pretty simple and clean. A lot of times our campus sends out surveys and it's 12 paragraphs of instructions about how to take the survey. We try to keep it very simple and approachable. Sometimes we're able to give a $5 gift card out. So we have had some success with that. It's a little tricky on some academic campuses to do that. So we haven't always had that, but there's a new program that allows us to give out a little bit of gift cards. And so we usually just do a drawing for a $5 gift card. So it costs us $5. We can send it out to 364 people. And just, we do a drawing. So one person wins $5. So it's been pretty valuable. And we have, so in this example, we got 26 people to participate in a tree test, which is pretty good for $5. And this is just the results of the tree test. If you're not familiar with tree testing, it's an information architecture validation study. We use, I think actually Optimal Workshop, I believe, is from New Zealand. I think that's where we sometimes have issues with payment because they're all the way in New Zealand, but it's a great tool. We use TreeJack, which is their product, and Optimal Sort have worked really well for that unmoderated studies, and for moderated studies. It's helpful as well. Yeah. And it makes cool visuals, which I always like. And that was to help us figure out where on the site should we use content. So we sort of did the content testing and then the architecture testing. Another helpful thing we've done is created a research repository. So this is basically a database of both searchable and filterable research insights. So anytime we complete any kind of study, even however small, even if it's just a Talkback board, we add it to our research repository for our future selves. So we have some research to look back on. So when another question comes up or a new project, we're able to go back and build off the research we've done before. This used to be all over the place, Google Drive, box folders, people's local computers. So it was very helpful to have one place that we put all of this and make the tagging really useful so we can easily see, let's look at all the usability testing studies, let's look at all the card sorts, that type of thing. And this is also in Notion, if you don't recognize Notion. Another great thing that we've done recently is create our own playbook. So you may be familiar with these, but we created one that is out there in the world. It's at the uxcookbook.com. This was our designer, Bob, is the person who came up with this idea and has really been leading this effort. But a lot of the people on our team have written different recipes. And the idea is it's a way to get anyone started with a variety of UX methods. So it's a way to, as we do consulting work, as people in the library come to us, people on campus come to us, we can point them to something. It's got templates that are reusable and adaptable. And it is more focused on higher education, which is kind of nice. There's some other stuff out there that's more industry focused. And so this kind of helps for our audience especially, but it is available to anyone who's going to find it useful. And a piece of that, which is a question we always get, is, well, which method do I choose? Here's a list of 75 potential research methods. What's going to make the most sense for me? So we created something that we call the kind of choose your own UX adventure tool. And so it helps kind of walk people through just thinking through where they are in the stage in their project and what might be a helpful method to use at that point. Okay, so it's my time to take a breath and ask you another question. So if you still have that Menti up, or you can bring it up again, it's the same code, it's menti.com. And I wanted to hear what your biggest challenges are to doing UX work. And I was thinking maybe I should have asked this before some of these slides, but what are some of the challenges that you've run across? Yeah. I do know recruitment, something that's come up probably the most in our consulting work on campus. It just seems like such a burden, very time intensive. Yeah, and then yeah, no money, no budget. Hard to put into one box. You can also add to as many boxes as you want, so go to town. And that, yeah, but COVID, like I said earlier, COVID has just changed everything for so many of us. All of our past things that we maybe built or learned how to do are maybe less relevant right now. Recruiting users in the accessibility space, one of the things we added to our participant pool sign-up form is we have a question in there about, do you use assistive technology? So that we're able to capture that. And right now it's a pretty small percentage that do, but we have started to build that. I think that's really important too. We've partnered a little bit with our Disability Resources Center. There are ways to do it, but it can be a challenge. That's really important. Audience too busy. Organizational resistance, we could do a whole nother meetup on that, right? Building the culture of UX and advocacy, and that's part of our work sometimes, is helping shift that culture. When it's interesting, the lack of time in UX just added to usual tasks. One of the reasons we started UX at UA, which is the meetup group that I'm an organizer for, is there was one other person on campus, this was 2017, and she had just gone to a Nielsen Norman Group training. So she'd gotten UX certified. She was very excited about this. She's like, who are the UX people on campus? And you Google, I was the only person in 2017 in the entire university, 9,000 people, 9,000 employees, that had UX in my title. But I knew there were other people doing it. They just didn't have it in their title. So that's why we formed this group, was where are the UXers at? And now we've got 1,000 people in our meetup group. So they're out there, but it's not, a lot of times it's not written into their job description explicitly. And it does sometimes feel like an add-on if you're already doing your full-time job that you were hired to do. But we should all be doing UX work, right? I don't know. Yeah, the organization thing. Stakeholder buy-in. I think for UX Wellington organizers, this gives you lots of ideas for future meetups, right? There's a lot of, yeah.
Yeah, I'm loving it.
It's a little bit of therapy, because I think many of us, like if we could +1 or thumbs up some of these, I think they resonate. A lot of these resonate with me. So nice to have, but not essential. Yeah, got a ways to go. Okay, I'm going to keep us moving. So, oh, there's another question. So one more for you. What might be helpful for you? And this is also a select all that apply. I am curious, given we have very different contexts that we're all working in, which of these might be helpful for you? Cookbook's off to a strong lead. That's great. And a lot of these are not that heavy of a lift. They take a little while to maybe get going, like the repository and participant pool, but just getting the framework set up is not that hard. It really wasn't. I'm excited to see there's quite a few Tiny Cafe fans too. That's great. I should actually do a shout out to Zoe Chow. She was the UX librarian at Penn State. And like 6 or 7 years ago, she presented on the UX Cafe at a conference. And it was a very similar model to what we came up with. She was doing mostly user interviews at the time, and she ended up moving on to do work out in industry. But I was like, yeah, we should all be doing this. If you work right directly with your users, it's such an easy thing to do. Cool. I'm gonna wait 5 more seconds and see if more come in. I can't remember if I put it in the credits or resources at the end, but I did write a Medium article on how we built the research repository. And there is a link, it's a public link. You can actually go and look at the research repository. We put all the private data behind a firewall. So if you wanted to just see what it looks like in action, you're welcome to do that. And I talked through it in the Medium article, how we built it. We used a template that someone else had created, which helps too. You don't have to always start from scratch, which is good. Okay. So I'm just going to spend the last bit here talking through sort of an entire project. So I've talked about kind of these one-off, more almost ad hoc little pieces, but I wanted to give you a picture of what it looks like kind of from start to finish in my world. An example I wanted to give was what I call a website do-over. I'm not a huge fan of website redesign because people have different assumptions about what that means. And a lot of times it means updating the homepage or updating the visual design, and it was much bigger than that. So we were rebuilding and redesigning the entire website, including the information architecture, the contents, everything else. And so this was the old website, was built in 2014, and it had a separate mobile website, which we see less of these days, but you may be familiar with the separate mobile website situation, which made sense perhaps in 2014, made much less sense today. This was last year that we redid the site. And it was pretty dated, you know, it didn't work very well for people. We sort of joked that the little girl in the public health photo on the homepage has probably graduated college by now. So it really just needed a visual refresh and content refresh. The project team was myself and one of our librarians. She was the nursing librarian who was kind of our subject matter expert. So she worked directly with faculty and students at the medical school. We had Kurtz, our admin assistant. He was the one editing the website, the content on the site. And then we had student assistants from the UX team. And like I said, we have different students almost every semester. So America graduated and she left in August, and then Leonardo started in the fall, and then Megan took over from Leonardo. So we had several people kind of coming through on that side to support the project. And we did a lot of different methods. So there was a satisfaction survey that wasn't actually work that I did, but it was work that the library had already done. So they'd sent out a survey to their users, very broad about the health sciences library. And they had 350 responses. They had a good response rate. And that was part of what motivated them to do the website, because the #1 complaint and the #1 ask was to make the website better. We did a series of user interviews over Zoom. We did some card sorting for the information architecture. We did what I call impression tests. So kind of those first impressions, the first 5 or 10 seconds you're looking at something, what do you think? Give us your feedback. And then some usability tests, actually observing people using the new website. This is Mary Beth, who's our nursing librarian. One of the things I like to do when I go on these projects now is not be the only one doing the research, but actually train up the other people on the team to do the work. So kind of the democratization of research, which you may have heard if you've been to sort of in the UX research space, that idea of can we empower other people to do UX research? And how do you do that while keeping the quality of the research, but also raising the awareness and the visibility and the skill set across the organization? So anyway, Mary Beth was brave and very nervous at first to do her first user interview, but she did an amazing job. And that was really helpful for her to get that experience as well, and hear directly from people. We did usability tests. This was a great example where we didn't know she was going to be on her phone, and she hopped onto Zoom, our participant, and she's like, oh, I'm on my phone. Is that okay? And I said, that's brilliant. We'd love to do some testing from the phone. We didn't actually plan for that. And we were able to do testing that way, which was great. And we did find out that it worked well on mobile, which was really good. That was one of our goals. After launch, we did 12 more usability tests. Most of those were in Tiny Cafe. So we were able to test those top tasks. Again, we tracked everything in Notion. We had a kind of our list of our short list of the top tasks. And one of our goals was to make sure that all of those people were successful in doing. And just some of the other methods. So web analytics, we're always looking at that. That helps inform the top tasks and helps us prioritize content. We had some related tree testing for information architecture going on with our main website at the time, and a lot of it related. So we were able to build off some of that knowledge that was being gathered from that other study. We did a competitive analysis. So I always like to look for inspiration from others. So we did look at a lot of other health science library websites to see what are they doing? How can we be informed and inspired by other people's work? Prototyping, we did sketch prototyping. We actually had a collaborative session. It was all over Zoom, but people sketched on pen and paper, took photos, uploaded them to Notion, and then we critiqued them as a group. And that was really helpful. And none of us are designers, so that we didn't actually have a designer on the project at that point. But so that was a helpful way to get non-designers doing design work and kind of learning a little bit about that skill set. We had regular stakeholder feedback sessions. We went to regular meetings and got feedback from people that really care, that are going to make or break the success of a project sometimes. And then we did have an ongoing feedback survey. So a way for people to just submit feedback as things were changing. So just a couple before and after. So we did improve the navigation and the branding. It wasn't actually on U of A branding anymore, so we were able to get it kind of up to code from a university perspective. One of the things we realized both from analytics and from the interviews was that people did not see this chat. It was pretty hidden, and it was also one of the most important things on the site. And so we made chat and ask us actual big call to action buttons rather than part of the utility navigation. We made the site search an actual search box as opposed to a link, and we updated and aligned the navigation. Oh, and we also linked it back to the university libraries because there was actually no way to do that before, which was bad. We did simplify a lot of things. We used to have a massive drop-down menu called top resources that had a secondary level. This was a big usability problem, especially on mobile, trying to get people over here, people with different ways to navigate through content. This was very problematic. And also a really long list that we just wanted to not have that in our dropdown. And we were able to figure out a way to promote the really top databases to the homepage and then actually integrate this big list into an existing, what we call database of databases. So if you're in libraries, this is the A to Z list that SpringShare provides. Previously, we had the static list. Now we're using a system to keep things more up to date, which is great. It was really nice that when we did, I'm not a huge survey person, but sometimes they can be useful, especially if you're trying to gather a lot of data. So we were able to send out a survey and ask people what they thought of the new sites and what they liked most about it. And the number one response, or the number one word that people put that they liked about it, was easy. So just hearing that from a large number of users was really great. Made the stakeholders really happy as well. Yeah, and I think that was my last slide. So I do have some links here. I think we have the slide deck available for you, so you should be able to get access to these links. UX Ed is where I wrote about, I actually have an article in there about Tiny Cafe and about the research repository. And one of our interns, Rachel, wrote about the participant pool. So all of those are kind of, the stories of those are in there. That's the repository live link, and then UX at UA. I think that's it. So yeah, I'd love to have questions and discussion about what's on everyone's mind.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rebecca. That was an amazing, amazing run through of your work and your history and what you do. Please, I think it would be great if everyone just takes a moment to just show our thanks with a bit of a clap reaction. And while people are getting a chance to kind of catch up to all the things you talked about, I'm going to just start off with a bit of a Q&A session and kick off with a few questions. So what we like to do is have a mix of questions from chat, but also have an opportunity for people to just ask the questions directly to you. So what I'll do is we'll go through a couple of questions first that I've been collecting from chat, and then we'll just open it to the floor, if that's okay. So first question from Jane Hadaway. She has a question around development prioritization for websites versus other projects. So I'll read it out. How does the development work for the websites get prioritized against developer time and other university projects? Or do you have a percentage of their time? And if so, how much?
I'm not sure I understand the percentage of the time part, but as far as development, you mean web development staff to do the development work on the site? Because we have a development team that has tried many different ways to prioritize projects, and it's been quite a struggle actually, because there's always too many things to do. Everyone wants their project done. And so we've done a few different approaches. When I was the website product manager, one thing that was really nice is we had a roadmap, and it was approved by our library leadership. So I believe it was every 6 months, we would bring it to that library leadership group and they would approve it like officially and say, these are the priorities, this is what we're working on. And we also try to align it with both our strategic priorities as an organization and our user priorities, and like where do those overlap and what's most important both to the end user and the business goals, and trying to kind of map those out. But I think we've had a challenge because we've been through 5 different department heads for our technology team. So anytime a new department head comes on, they have a new idea about how do we prioritize projects. Last year we did a whole thing, a technology infrastructure project around, a piece of it was how to prioritize the work. It's a challenge. I don't think we figured it out, honestly. But I do think having strategic directions for your organization and being able to map to those has been helpful. And even just having our research repository and having data to point to, this is a critical urgent need for students, for faculty. We need to prioritize this. I'm actually strangely in charge of strategic planning for our library now, which has been great and also an interesting challenge because I don't actually sit on our library leadership team, but I'm in charge of strategic planning. So it's a little bit wonky sometimes, but it's been great to just bring in some of the UX thinking around how we do strategic planning. So we did some activities, we did some design thinking kind of work with our leadership team and across the library, which was helpful, getting people thinking about personas and empathy mapping and who are the audiences that we need to be serving better. And that's been a helpful thing for our culture, I think, over time. But yeah, prioritization is always hard.
I think that's an awesome answer. And as someone who's also worked in the university environment, I can definitely understand that sometimes people don't have a very high awareness of UX as part of some of these large scale initiatives. And yeah, I think that's awesome because I love how you spoke about how you engaged in the UX, like engaged in that conversation throughout those, I guess, at very early stages of some of the strategy, which is great that you're in that position. I hope that answers as well the question that Kate has here about engaging with UX in their organization and how and overcoming any resistance that you might have faced. I think that's a really good question. I'm going to summarize the next question as more around inclusivity and accessibility in terms of methodology. We had a few comments from Kay around, I guess, generally the methodologies that were used and how, for example, with Talkback or maybe some of the other things like Tiny Cafe, you might not be able to access, even though it's great to be able to kind of engage in students in a very hands-on way, not be able to access some of them low vision or those might have mobility issues. And so to summarize, how have you tried to account for that? And are there any resources that you rely on in terms of your practice?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I did mention that we have done partnerships with our disability resources. Our campus, which is kind of amazing, a couple years ago, we now have a disability cultural center on campus, which I, before the pandemic, would visit quite frequently. So something that we have tried is really engaging and connecting with students with disabilities in that way, in that setting. And also, like I mentioned, the participant pool, asking that question. We also have hired students with disabilities. There's a program out of our College of Education where high school leavers, is that what we call them, school leavers? So students right at the cusp of actually graduating high school who have intellectual disabilities get a hands-on experience working in a university setting. So they get to observe classes at the university and get an internship experience as their first working experience. We've had students come through that program and work on the UX team and be in charge of our Talkback Boards and help participate in Tiny Cafe. So almost as a, interestingly, sort of participatory design model, they're getting paid for their time and they're sitting on the team. One of the things we realized, so one of those particular students, she only uses an iPad. That's the only way she can interact with our websites. And we found out we had never tested our library room reservations from a tablet before. And the performance was so bad, she literally could not reserve a room. And we were able to then take that example and take it to the vendor and say, people who are using iPads can't access our rooms. We have a massive amount of study rooms. So we're interesting that way as a library. And that's one of the reasons that was such a performance issue. But we found out because we had someone on the team that was using the technology. So that's another way that we've tried to approach it. But any other ideas, I'd love to hear them. I do think that's important. And it's not something everyone's doing for sure. We do also have a tool called Site Improve that does a lot of accessibility testing of our sites and gives us scores and points out different things that we can improve upon. And that's been helpful for us too.
Nice. Yeah, I definitely think I'm really glad that accessibility appears to be becoming more to the forefront for all the work we're doing as UXs. And I think it's great. I'm sure this is something that will be a great thing to discuss in like an open conversation after the Q&A. Moving on to the next question, Stephen asks, what challenges have you faced when organizing different content types, i.e. articles, videos, books? I'm not quite sure what this means particularly, but Stephen, if you want to clarify or add to that, feel free to do so.
What that means, like in libraries, like on how to organize within the search experience or organize in the physical space.
Apologize. It was mainly around the search experience. So when searching for different content types, so really information architecture question.
That's a very timely question because we're having debates right now about that. Something that some libraries have done. So we use third-party products for our search and discovery layer, is what they call it, to access kind of the catalog of the library. And you're a little limited in what you can do. There's a lot of metadata that's being that's populated in there that's pushing it out to the front end. But one thing that we can do that some libraries have done is rather than displaying everything together by default is what they call a bento box search SERP, search engine results page. So a bento box design actually says, here's the articles, here's the books, here's the website, because that's another issue is like searching catalog versus searching website. And that's a little confusing in libraries, like you're searching for library services versus content. And so we ended up doing some tiny cafe testing where we looked at a bento box design. Ours is not, and we had people do kind of a comparison test, and they did the exact same search in one and the exact same search in another, and we randomized which one they did first. And there were so many biases going into this because half the UX team is like, bento box is great, and the other half's like, no, it's terrible. And we found out that they're both not great, and that it's hard, and it depends. It really depends on the person. We had a faculty member for that example come by, and he's like, oh, you're testing the library website? And he said, I hate your search. I have that as a quote. He's like, I hate your search. It's terrible. He searches a lot of Chinese language, which is really hard to search for in the interface that we have. The way that the characters are recognized is just really bad for that. Really good for some other students in other disciplines. It's a very tricky, big problem. And we're looking at it. I don't think anyone's figured out the answer yet. And there are little things, even just this week, that I heard. If you're searching for a book title in our search and we don't have the book, you might get 100 results, but they're all book reviews. And you're like, where's the book? Where's the book? It's just book reviews because it's got the title in there. So because you're showing everything together. And they wrote a very pretty nasty complaint to the library. And I shared back why that is. And like, well, it said there's a little tag that says review, but if you're not paying attention to that, you don't know. So he's like, where's the book? So it's an interesting, hard problem. And thank you for asking it. I don't really have a good answer. But yeah, it's an interesting one. There's a book called what was it called? I think it's called Designing the Search Experience by Josh something. That was pretty good. I mean, as far as filtering and how do you think about metadata, think about what displays on the results page, like what's the most important stuff to pull out to the results versus people see it on that deeper level. So there's some good stuff out there as far as that goes, but yeah, the content, it's hard.
You're bringing back memories from my days having to search research papers.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I feel like, yeah. I did a quick search. Is it Designing the Search Experience, the Information Architecture of Discovery by Tony Russell Rose and Tyler Tate? Or is that a different one?
Yes, Tyler Tate. Yep. I went to a workshop in England with Tyler Tate years ago, and it was very good. It made me think about all kinds of things I haven't thought about related to search. So yeah, I recommend that.
I'm just going to quickly put that in the chat, but also we'll collect these links for later. Also, do you have any resources on the bento box design pattern or method? Because I actually haven't heard of this before, and I couldn't. It's very hard to search this, as you can imagine.
Yeah, it probably is. I don't even know. Gosh, I mean, if you like UX librarians talk about it a lot. So if you look, I know if I was able to find some stuff, gosh, you know, I could share after this. We did a competitive analysis of all the bento boxes that we could find on other library websites. And I could share that, but I don't know about actual, I don't have a resource in mind. It's more just through talking to people and seeing
Embedded
things.
knowledge, passed from librarian to librarian.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting, because it's more of a librarian thing, which is part of the issue, I think, for me when I think about that, because it's breaking a pattern that people are used to. Like, should libraries be innovative and come up with their own thing when it's like, this breaks all the mental models people have around search? Why would we do that? So I think that's why I get like jammed up in my head about, let's not think that we should be innovative here. but it's a hard problem, but no one's figured out how to solve this problem. So maybe that's what we need to do.
I'm going to wrap up with a few more questions, and then I think what we'll do is we'll just open it up to questions from people in Zoom. Eleanor mentioned that she'd like a link to a repository. I believe this was earlier when you were talking about a person at Penn State making something. I can't remember, but if Eleanor, if you want to clarify this, that would be great.
If it's our research repository, I can put that link in chat.
Yeah, and it's in the resource. Sorry.
Yeah, it should be right.
Awesome. Yeah. Awesome.
I think
it's in the resource as well. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Works.
And I think there's another question, last one I have here from Jane about, I guess, maybe asking a little bit more about the Talkback boards, and specifically, does it record audio? And again, Jane, if you want to clarify your question, feel free to explain. But yeah, the question is, the question is, can you explain more about the Talkback board? Does that record audio?
Right. No, so the Talkback boards are mostly unmoderated, captured purely through sticky notes and stickers. So it's usually, we have a prompt and people are writing their answers on a sticky note. And then we usually have a way for people to upvote answers using a sticker. Most of the time that's all. So the Talkback is not them talking. It's, you know, that maybe makes it a little confusing in the name that we came up with. But that they're talking to the board, like they're giving us their feedback or their insights. Did that answer, Jane?
Yeah, thank you. I just looking for further clarification.
Awesome. So I think that's all the questions I have. Oh, actually, no, there's one more by, chat is moving very quickly. Oh, Sydney, hello. What's your design process around conversational UX design?
Ooh, we had our last virtual meetup was voice and conversational design, but I was not the speaker because that's not my expertise. It depends what you mean too. Like we don't do voice design. We don't do that type of like Alexa skills or anything like that. But conversational design is also that broader, how do you feel like you're having a conversation with the user? So I have done a lot of stuff around writing for the web, writing as a conversation, writing like you talk. I've done a lot of training both across the library and other libraries around that. It's like how to create content that is conversational, but that's more in the written word, less so in the voice design. So we haven't really tinkered. Not a lot of libraries have gone to that space yet. Some library vendors have done a little bit. Some are trying it out. I don't know, maybe we'll get there. We'll see if it gets prioritized in our strategic planning process.
Cindy, I hope that answers your question. If not, feel free to unmute yourself and explain further. But with that, I'd like to open up to everyone here on Zoom. Perhaps if you could just raise your hand and we can call you out and you can ask a question or maybe start a discussion topic that we can go through. Rebecca, do you have enough? Are you still happy to stay on for a little bit longer?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. And Kamari, feel free to cut me off whenever you want.
Jeff, I see your hand and your face. Hi.
Hi, Rebecca. How are you?
I'm doing well.
We're doing a lot of testing around Primo as well. Funny that, academic libraries and using Primo and Alma. And so I'm really interested in sort of that kind of work you've been doing. We did some UX with students around Primo because we found that how to like request and hold a book is really complicated, particularly because we have lots of different libraries and lots of different collections. There's so many different pathways, but only one form. So I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit more about that. I don't know if that's too particular to academic libraries, but.
Yeah, I was thinking I can share, I'm looking it up right now and I can put a link in chat we did test the hold process back before we implemented. We're maybe but we're somewhat complicated. We have a couple locations and stuff. We did a few customizations around that. There's also the sign in. When do you make someone sign in? That was a huge debate. When to make someone sign in and what to call that link. I'm going to put this link in chat, which might be still relevant because I know there's a little bit around hold. But one thing that's interesting, Jeff, that we should collaborate. We are in the next month or two adding technology booking through Primo Alma, and we're trying to avoid having users go and see Primo at all because like having a laptop record in a catalog is weird. Like it looks weird. It says like how to cite, like you don't cite a laptop, right? But you borrow it and it's the same system on the back end. So it makes sense that we would have the records in Primo, but then, so we're trying to actually pull the API. We already use the API to get live real-time availability. And we're trying to just avoid completely having people see Primo, which is a challenge. We'll see if we get to it, but because I know that that's going to be an awkward experience for people. And even people holds we've done okay with, but most of the testing that we've done more recently is more about search and less about account management and like transactions like holds and stuff. It's been mostly around the search recently. But yeah, I put that link, which you can see some of the things that were successful and less successful at that time. And there is a bit about the signing in and how that worked for people. Yeah, we did change, the custom text, I just found it. So we changed our custom text for the sign in to say want to place a hold. Because I think before that it said to see more options sign in. Or like, what does more options mean? So that was one of the little things we did, but yeah.
That's just great. That webpage is excellent. I'll have a look at it.
Cool. I think Steven's got a hand up.
Hey, Rebecca. So I'm curious to know how you keep findings in the research repository up to date.
So we have weekly research meetings and the first item is repo updates, and almost inevitably, and it's usually me, I'm like, I didn't get to my repo updates yet this week. So you do have to dedicate time to doing it. We've built it into the workflow. So anytime we close out a project, we have a share stage, like put it in the repo. Maybe we also share, we have a who wants to know, who cares about these results, because sometimes we also want to send them out to stakeholders or send them out to other projects that might be interested. So we do try to share, but we need to get better at it because it takes time. And there is stuff in there that's like, if you go in right now, you will see stuff that I have not finished in there. We have the bento boxes actually is in there. And I went in, one of our students left before the end of the semester and he was doing a lot of the bento box work. So he was going to do that. I kind of forgot and I went in, I'm like, oh, let me go look at these. And then it was just a blank page. I'm like, oh, I better get in there before it leaves my brain. And we have it documented elsewhere, but putting it in the repository itself, you have to kind of get in the habit of it. And it took some time when we first started. We wanted to take all of our past research and also put that in, but we had to really prioritize what are the projects that still matter, that are relevant right now. We have a Kanban board specifically for repo, for what we call the research repo. And so we have a backlog of items and we have people kind of volunteer who might be interested in working on those. And we also always have a reviewer. So we have kind of the person who drafts the entry, and then we have someone else review it and just make sure it's all accurate and makes sense to people before we say it's final. So we're kind of working through some of the content strategy, I think, around the repo, but yeah. And we also added a thing that says last updated on. So we have that date in there so that, because we have a now what section at the bottom of every entry, And yeah, it's not really feasible to always have everything up to date as of today, because it's just too much. But at least you can see it was up to date as of, February 2021.
Any questions from anyone else want to raise their hand and ask a question? Kay has one actually in chat, so I'll read it out. Are there any secrets to getting a bigger budget and time frame for improving usability and testing? Something I think we all probably wish. Oh, sorry, Kay, do you want to just share the question? See, your hand is up.
Oh, it's like her face disappeared.
Sorry, it takes a while for the tech to
There you
come
are.
through.
No worries.
I mean, that was partly tongue in cheek, but also relating to the other part of my question, which was about co-designing with end users about what they want or need at the start of the project, because I've seen so many projects where good idea, there's sign off, there's time and budget are allocated, but then they get to the end of it and, oh, we didn't think about including this, and they've run out of time and budget to actually do something, and there's chunks of audience that are left out. And for me, that is that partly the co-designing at the start, who needs to be included, who needs to be in the room, whose voices can count, who is the target audience. So this is my personal viewpoint, but you're a professional, I'm just an amateur. So
I wish I knew all the secrets and all the answers to these questions. But yeah, I mean, I do sort of asking that question early on of whose voice are we not hearing at this moment that we need to be, and like bringing that in as a regular thing that people are used to hearing and asking that question. Another question I often like to ask is, this isn't even really related, but kind of goes back to the inclusion and accessibility, is who might this harm? Like if this goes wrong, who might this harm? And thinking about that as well. But yeah, the one thing that's I've loved, and I've been fortunate because of working in the library, we have all the students coming in and working with us all the time. So we, in our website steering group, it's a bunch of librarians and technology people and students. Like students are in the room for those conversations, and often will, not like they're going to represent the student voice entirely, but they're there in the room and can question things, and giving them that voice to question things early on and bring up issues or suggestions. We had 3 students on the health science library project, for example, and trying to do that if you are, I don't know if you're in an academic setting or what your setting is, but are there ways to bring in that student voice early on? We do some of those little things like concept testing and impression testing. So before you get too far down a path, can you share the idea with some people who are your audience and see if that's the right direction? Because I know I've been, years ago, we had this library tools tab that we created. We still have it. And the idea was, oh, faculty are going to love this because they'll be able to customize their own library guides within the course management system. Huge assumption that faculty would spend the time to do that. And none of them did. Like very, very few took advantage of that. But we thought we made this really cool thing, but we never actually talked to the faculty and realized, like, would they actually use this thing that we think is great, but we're not them. So yeah, I mean, you can waste so much time. That's kind of one of the big arguments of the return on investment is you do your UX study early, you're going to save so much time and labor by working on the right things and solving the right, like, actual problems and not problems that we invent or solutions that we think are the solutions before talking to the people they impact. So
yeah, no, I just dropped into the chat the suggestion that the complaints inbox is a really valuable tool for doing the research of actually having a part of the agenda. But it's also, I think, again, personal opinion, political nous a little bit of when putting up the options and selling it to management, who is likely to be vocal about their being left out if this isn't done well, and having that awareness is an important part of saying, if we don't do this because of disability rights or something else, what might be the reputational damage back to the organisation. And I think, though, that's got a risk of sometimes paralysing. We don't want to do the wrong thing, therefore we won't do anything.
yeah, that's true. But I do think, like, embarrassment is a good driver sometimes. I remember one of our technology department heads who hadn't really understood the importance of content strategy in this particular case. And I did a big content audit of our website. And I remember in this presentation showing a very embarrassing example of content on our website where we had 2 duplicated pages with different information on them. And he saw that, and as an administrator is like, if I went to a dean's meeting and I pulled this up accidentally, that's really embarrassing for me. And so there is something about that, you know, embarrassment of doing the wrong thing that can help. But yeah, how do you make that also not make people just stop and be nervous to try new things or experiment a little bit? I think Sydney. Yeah.
Hello. I thank you, Rebecca, for your time and the organization now. So I'm a student, and we've been told that user research is paramount. Yeah, unfortunately, there is this kind of, I think, problem, which is the lack of user research in companies. So how do you think this varies amongst industries? So for instance, the gaming industry, how do they address the user research and so on? And if there is any equal priority amongst all the industries?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I don't know I'm the best person to answer that question for you. I can say that I've seen more UX work happening in both the game design space and the VR space. That seems to be sort of evolving, and you know, voice design and stuff like that. Interestingly, when I went to the Nielsen Norman Group training, which is a big, pretty well-known group that does certification in UX, when I went to a lot of their stuff in 2020, I was really surprised how many were in insurance and financials and banks and stuff. So I'm like, we don't have like I don't know. That doesn't occur to me as a big UX space, but it is for some reason. They seem to be hiring a lot of UX people. I think government is hiring a lot more UX people than they used to. So in the United States, we have Code for America, 18F, and Ad Hoc are all ones that I'm familiar with, and they're all doing government services design. We just had a recent thing at the federal level around really putting resources into improving digital government services. So I think that's an interesting space where things are growing. But I think, yeah, it really varies. I think the industry is getting stronger, but I don't really know. Maybe others in the room know more about industries that are maybe growing or less so invested in UX. I feel like higher ed is pretty far behind, but we're working on it.
Does anyone else? I'm just having a look and seeing. Well, if no one's asking a question, I'd like to ask a question actually. I think one of the things that I really love about your talk is how much you talk about the student voice, and particularly not just as users, but also as part of your team. And for me, I think this leans in a lot into mentorship and learning on the job, which I think is really important and something that we often talk about in UX Wellington. And so I guess my question would be, how, have you found a good balance between practicing UX and also supporting UX learning as part of the work you do? And if so, like what's your mindset around it, I guess?
Totally. Yeah, that's a great question. I do. I mean, one of my favorite parts of my job is bringing on I like to call them early career UXers, students that are interested in pursuing UX. And a lot of times it's even their first job. Some of our undergrads, it's their first time kind of working in a professional setting. And so I love giving opportunities for leadership of projects, a lot of partnership and shadowing early on, building up their confidence to do work. Sometimes they're really interested in design, and they'll often partner with our designer on prototyping and things like that. We're trying to also tie it back into some of the curriculum. So we have some UX related classes. We don't have a major or anything, but we have some instructors that are teaching UX, and trying to also partner with those classes to bring in the students to do real world projects as possible. One of the things we started at UX at UA is a mentorship program, which is really exciting. And it includes people who are in industry, people who are have been around for a long time. And it includes a retired IBM designer, for example, but it also includes students. So some of our students have signed up kind of as peer mentors. And that's been a really interesting thing to see. like, you know, they've worked for 6 months on a UX team, but now they're a student that can talk to another student who's maybe interested in that career. And so we're trying to sort of also build up the different levels of mentorship and consider things like peer mentorship. And yeah, trying to, depending on what the thing is, just making sure the student is supported and they're not going to be put in a position where it's like political or they have to, you know, justify their work. So always kind of having their back, but giving them that freedom to try some stuff and get creative. And it's been really great seeing students. And like America's a good example where she graduated and became a UX architect like in 2 weeks after graduation, which was just amazing, right? And one of our interns she got her PhD, she did an independent study with us, and she got a job at user testing. So we're able to sort of give people those experiences and get them prepared. And there aren't many places on campus because there aren't a lot of UX teams, like we're the only one really, to get that kind of experience while they're still a student, which is nice that we can offer that.
That's so cool. We definitely have to chat in the future about how we can do the same here as well. Some of these opportunities are awesome. Perhaps we have one more, just enough time for one more question, and then we'll probably have to wrap up. Anyone else like to ask anything?
And I just put a link to the mentorship program if you're interested in kind of seeing how we did that.
Sweet, awesome.
Lightweight, like everything. List of people and their LinkedIns, but they all volunteered and it's been fun.
Oh, that's awesome. That's so cool. Okay, if there's no other questions, perhaps any closing words from you, Rebecca, or maybe Kamir, if there's anything you want to add?
Just before I forget, so we do have a UX at UA meetup group and we're all virtual right now. So if you or anyone you know is interested in presenting for one of our meetups, that would be amazing. I think it's always great to have new voices and people, especially, you know, people outside the country that have different experiences and lenses on the work that we do. So please reach out if you are at all interested in that. Yeah, and I don't think I have anything else to add. I think you have my contact information if you think of things or want to collaborate. Jeff will be in touch and maybe see each other in Tucson in June or July. Yeah, but thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Thank you. It was amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you all. And for me is the usual. If you would like to be our next speaker, get in touch. Here in the chat, you have our meetup page and our socials. Just send us a message. You don't have to be an expert speaker. If you have something to say, and if you need some support to build your presentation and even some coaching, we can help you with that. And the idea is that anyone can come and share. If you have something to share, just come, please, so we can keep this community alive. And the document I've shared in the chat, I can just share again. We are going to reshare it with the meetup group mail list, and you would have all the resources shared plus the recording of the presentation in there, maybe in a couple of weeks, right, Ian? Yeah. All right. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.